now we're talking to Thomas Mitchell, Associate Law Solicitor at RTA Law LLP, a specialist personal injury firm representing vulnerable road users who've been injured on Scotland's roads. And we're talking with him about this prospect of a Scotland-wide 20-mile-an-hour speed limit. This has been introduced in Wales already. A lot of people don't like it. They feel that it's disrespectful to their time and for an insufficiently attractive improvement in road safety. But what is right here? Let's find out what Thomas Mitchell says. Thomas, thanks for joining us this morning.
Morning, Lembit. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. I'm traveling at no miles per hour, but that feels to me a bit like 20 miles per hour. It doesn't sound very fast. Now, you may have a different view, of course, to me. I make no secret of the fact I'm really very skeptical about these kinds of proposals. But what is being proposed in Scotland, just so that we know the facts?
Yeah, so the proposal that's being made is effectively to reduce the speed on built-up area roads from what was 30 miles per hour to 20 miles per hour. And the history in Scotland on this is quite interesting. Back in 2019, we had a private members bill brought by a Green member of Scottish Parliament, a guy called Mark Ruskell. And at that point, he attempted to bring the private members bill to reduce the speed limit for these restricted roads to 20 miles per hour. But that bill failed at the stage 1 debate. However, the Butte House agreement between the SNP and the Green Party in 2021 effectively gave the Greens a way into government. And as part of that, the Greens pledged to reduce speeds to 20 miles per hour on these built-up roads as part of their major policy initiative in order to encourage more active travel. And because the Butte House Agreement allows that, you've now got government-wide support for this policy, and you're seeing a much bigger rollout now that that policy is up and running, and it's effectively being rolled out across all local councils as we speak.
So that's interesting, Thomas. I assumed the primary motivation was road safety. You're telling me that the primary motivation is to encourage people to cycle and walk because it's not worth driving at 20 miles an hour.
Not necessarily. There's probably three major initiatives to the policy. The first one is to reduce speed. The second one is to save lives. And the third one is to encourage active travel. There is irrefutable evidence that speeds that are lower when collisions are involved lead to lower causes of death and also in reduced injuries overall. It's just basic physics, and velocity involved in accidents at lower speeds tends to lead to saving of lives.
It sounds to me by inference that you're quite supportive of this proposal.
I am in general. I don't think a blanket rollout is the right approach. But in fairness, the Welsh approach seems to have been tarnished with that brush that it's a blanket rollout and there's no room for common sense. And that's simply not the case. Up here in Scotland, we have a rollout which is being managed by the National Roads Authority in partnership with local councils. And it will be a common sense approach. Where it's not appropriate to introduce 20 mile per hour zones, they will not be introduced. And the Welsh approach as well, that's under review for the next 5 years. So it's not as if suddenly we're all going to start driving around at 20 miles per hour for the foreseeable future. This is very much something which is under review, but at the same time, I do think it's a step in the right direction if we want to encourage active travel on our roads.
When Portsmouth, which is a city in the south of England, introduced 20 mile an hour speed limits, Thomas, the actual casualty rate increased. And it seems that there were three dynamics to that. The three dynamics were reduced level of attention, driving at 20, frustration, causing people to overtake, and thirdly, because of the low speed, people driving closer to each other. And then in Bath, it is another city, this time in the west of England, when they introduced it, they actually had the similar problem. So on the face of it, you would think, for the reason that you said, the simple laws of physics, there would be fewer injuries, but there were more.
Well, the Welsh government's assessment seemed to show slightly differing view. So their assessment was that 20 mile per hour speed limits will save at least 9 lives and reduce 98 serious injuries each year. And according to data from the Royal Society for Prevention of Accidents, traffic speeds of 30 to 40 miles per hour, the risk of a pedestrian death is 5.5 times more likely than if a pedestrian was hit by a car travelling in the region of 20 to 30. So it's simply not true to pick an individual city and say, well, this is the rule fits everybody. I think in general, the evidence shows that lower speed limits will reduce casualties overall. And that's seemed to be the assessment that's done by the Welsh.
I want to, after the break, Thomas, I want to explore the environmental implications of this, and also two other aspects: the question of civil liberties, the extent to which this is a patronising move, and perhaps another one which is interesting, particularly interesting to me, is the cost in time to an entire population when you're being made to drive at a lower speed. So we'll come back to all of that. We're going to stay with Thomas Mitchell for a while longer. If you want to have a point of view quite clear, Holly says, good morning. You can't drive safely at stupid speeds like 20 miles an hour. It's ridiculous. You can't focus at that mind-numbing speed. And who has the right to implement this nonsense? Quite right, Lembit. More accidents. And it's just like that idiot mayor of London doesn't listen to information and chooses his own ideas. Look at the fury at average speed checks. Drives me mad. It's like some strange experiment to frustrate the mind, not for safety at all. So, Thomas, Holly's not too keen on your position. Many people I know in Wales, where I used to live, have expressed great frustration because they're saying millions of hours will be lost. And no one's taking account of that just because of the lower speed limits, Thomas.
Well, if your point on journey times, Lembit, is that by reducing the speed from 30 to 20 increases the travel time, that's not necessarily true. I mean, simply put, journey times in urban areas tend to be determined by junctions and signals rather than just the speed limit alone. And in many cases, lowering the speed limit to 20 miles per hour will have little to no impact on journey times. I know the Welsh Government's analysis was that the average journey would be around 1 minute longer. So if you can save up to 9 lives a year by only having a journey time being 1 minute longer, is that not worth doing?
Well, that's the actuarial calculation. The question you're asking is exactly the one that I'm asking myself. The actuarial calculation. There's a phrase that I often used to hear when I was an MP. If it saves one life, then it's worth it. Well, in that case, Thomas, let's ban cycling because people die on bicycles. There has to be an acceptable level of injury and of death. Otherwise, you can't support cycling.
Of course, there has to be an acceptable level. But I think that in general, a road safety initiative to reduce speeds of 30 miles per hour in built-up areas is the right way to go because it achieves things for multiple user groups. You're encouraging active travel from cyclists, you're making the roads a more friendly place for pedestrians and active travel users, whilst at the same time you're still allowing the motorists to move through the transport network at a reasonable speed. It's not necessarily true that by reducing all of these speed limits from 30 to 20, you're suddenly all going to come to grind to a halt. It's just untrue to say that.
Holly adds, strange dystopian days when you're driving down a beautiful country lane, following some, I can't use the next expletive, some expletive head in a Tesla driving at 20 miles per hour. No, thank you. Not very keen there, quite obviously. None Your Business says, just with a modest hill, I can go faster on my skateboard. Your government must think you're children. So None Your Business doesn't think this is very, very smart. I'm suspecting Nanya is living in the UK. So are you going to, Thomas, is your position then that we should prosecute all cyclists who exceed 20 miles per hour?
No, Lembit, because speed limits in general apply to motor vehicles, not cyclists.
But why should a cyclist be able to exceed that speed limit?
Because the harm that a cyclist would bring if involved in a collision is much less than what the driver of a car would bring. We have recently had the introduction of a hierarchy of road users in the Highway Code, which puts the most vulnerable road users at the top of this tree and the least vulnerable users at the bottom. And effectively that represents the harm that these road users would bring if involved in a collision. That's why.
But this is about third-party harm. If you want to reduce the absolute number of deaths on the roads, then it's worth remembering the experience of of COVID. By the way, I'm finding this conversation very interesting, Thomas. I'm not trying to be deliberately provocative. It's a really interesting subject to me.
It is. Yes.
During, and we may have a difference of view, but that's the whole point about free speech, really. I looked at this professionally because some other work I do. And during the COVID lockdowns in the United Kingdom, cycling went up by around 40%. Other road traffic went down by about 20%. And cycling deaths went up by 40%. There's a direct proportional relationship in the number of deaths on cycles and the amount of cycling. And it does not bear any relation to other traffic density. So, Thomas, logically, if you want to save lives, you should be discouraging people from cycling.
I'm afraid that's not true from what I see every day, Lembit. I mean, in my daily work, I represent cyclists who have been involved in catastrophic injury. I also represent the families who have unfortunately had loved ones killed whilst cycling on Scotland's roads. And in the vast majority of those cases, they involve another driver, chiefly a motorist. So it's simply untrue from my point of view to say that the volume of traffic, and just because cycling increases means that cycle deaths will increase. It doesn't. The number one factor for cycling deaths in Scotland is other drivers of motor vehicles.
Well, it must be different in Scotland then. I won't have time to find the actual data, but it is a fact. I'll actually, just because I'm interested in it off the show, not for the debate, I'll actually send you the reference because it was clear as day. I was following this on a week-to-week basis and on a year-to-year basis, and cycling deaths are proportional to the amount of cycling. Let me ask you a different question, though. If the primary objective is to reduce deaths on the roads, why would you encourage people to get out of relatively safe road vehicles such as cars with a wheel in each corner and put them onto bicycles, which are inherently unstable?
Well, the idea is that we try, if we can, to reduce the number of cars on our roads, and that has all types of benefits, not least for the air pollution element, but also for the active travel element. The idea is that we want to make our roads a more friendly place for all people to use, because in the UK, traditionally, we have had a culture where we prioritise the motor car, and that's just how history has developed. And I think what's being done now is we're redressing the imbalance we have in our country on our roads, and we need to protect the most vulnerable. And at the end of the day, that's what lowering the speed limit to 20 miles per hour seeks to do. And the idea behind it is not only from a road safety point of view, but it will also encourage more people to try and perhaps leave the car at home if they can, whilst also not excluding them from using the transport network. The thing we have to remember is the transport network is for everybody to use. And whilst government's objectives to try and encourage more forms of green travel are admirable, at the same time, I take your point that free speech and the right to choose is very important, and that has to be maintained at all costs. And that's what the proposal seeks to do. It seeks to find a balance that can work for everybody who uses the transport network, not just the few.
Then there's quite a strong reaction in the chat about your view that cyclists can go faster than 20 miles per hour. But nobody else can. There's a certain amount of resentment. This isn't a statistically objective fact, so you can call me out on it. But I sense a certain amount of resentment towards cyclists because they're on pavements, they jump through red lights, they seem to be above the law. And you're saying that they can break the speed limit isn't going to please people who are already annoyed with cyclists. What would you say to those people?
Well, I'm not saying they can break the speed limit. I'm saying that they have to adhere to the rules of the road which apply to them. And we always hear that adage that cyclists ride on pavement, cyclists run red lights. I mean, the question I would put to you is, what is a cyclist? Is a cyclist someone who's lycra clad, riding at 25 miles per hour through the town centre? Or is a cyclist a little girl or boy trying to get to school in the morning? Or is it somebody like me? I ride to work in my suit some days. Is it somebody who is trying to get fitter? Is it somebody who's trying to save money to ride to work? A cyclist needs to be thought of as a human being and not just a cyclist there to inconvenience me, the motorist. At the end of the day, the way in which we're going to have better outcomes on our roads is by fostering a relationship of mutual respect for all road users. And we see each other as human beings just trying to get somewhere.
Just one more for you. Holly asks a question to the lawyer. Can I gallop on my horse at over 20 miles per hour, in your view, Thomas?
I do not believe speed limits apply to horses, so it'd probably be ill-advised, but as far as I'm aware, I think she probably could.
Yeah, Holly says, is there horse facial recognition? Do your cameras do that in Scotland?
I think we're delving into the realms of silliness now, Lembit.
I think it's a little bit rhetorical. Just finally, then, is this just a factual question? Is this, you said this rollout is slightly discretionary, so it's not actually a blanket 20-mile-an-hour speed limit?
No, it's a rollout it's in partnership for Transport Scotland. They run the strategy, and the implementation of that strategy is done by Bear Scotland, which is the company for Transport Scotland who does this rollout, and that's in partnership with all the local councils. So it's very much a collaborative approach at all levels of government in order to try and get this rollout done. But it does not mean that it is a blanket 20 mile per hour on every single road we have in Scotland. It is certain areas which have been deemed to be suitable for the rollout.
Thanks very much. It's a really interesting discussion. If I can find this data, I'll just send it to you. I'm interested to have the dialogue with you personally on this subject for professional reasons.